Scenario 1. Culture. Real Scene 4. Film History. For centuries, humans has experimented with what would become the two key elements of cinema: the projection of images using light and the illusion of motion created by exploiting the optical phenomenon called persistence of vision. Unknown.
My goal. Once I have completed Scenario 1, I will be able to correctly use relative pronouns to join clauses, and I will understand how to construct conditional sentences using if. I will also learn about the history and development of the motion picture industry through the reading material.
Introductory Questions. 1. How much do you know about the history of the film industry? 2. Do you know what happened in the golden age of Hollywood? 3. Do you know what the technological ancestors for filmmaking are?
Introduction. Motion picture film is one of the most rapidly evolving of any artistic or communications mediums, as befits, perhaps, the first great invention of the modern era. Film has gone through an array of changes and developed an incredible variety and sophistication in barely more than 100 years of existence. Technological ancestors. In 1894, Thomas Edison introduced the kinetograph to the public, the first moving picture camera, and the kinetoscope, a hand-cranked single-viewer lighted box to display the resulting films. Kinetoscope parlors were supplied with 50-foot film snippets, shot by Edison's employee, W.K. Dixon, the device's chief inventor, in their Black Maria studio. The invention was a widely imitated international success, and Europe saw a cascade of rival devices. Rising above the pack was Auguste and Louise Lumière cinematograph, a portable 3-in-1 camera, developer, printer, and projector. In France in late 1895, the Lumière brothers began exhibiting projected films before a paying public. They sparked the move from single viewer units to projection and quickly became Europe's leading producers of the new medium. Even Edison joined the burgeoning projection trend with his Vitascope in less than 6 months. The movies of the time were seen mostly via temporary storefront spaces and travelling exhibitors, or as acts in vaudeville programs. A film could be under a minute long and would usually present a single scene, be it authentic or staged, a public event, a sporting event, or slapstick comedy. There was little to no cinematic technique, no editing, no camera movement, and flat, stagey compositions. But the novelty of realistically moving photographs was enough for a motion picture industry to blossom before the end of the century, in countries around the world. The silent era. Inventors and producers had repeatedly tried to marry the screen image with synchronous sound, but no practical method was devised until the late 20s. Thus, for the first 30 years of their history, movies were more or less silent, although they were often accompanied by live music, sometimes sound effects, and with dialogue and narration present in the form of subtitles. Early developments in technique, form, and business. The Paris stage magician Georges Méliès began shooting and exhibiting films in 1896. His stock in trade became films of fantasy and the bizarre. These included A Trip to the Moon in 1902, possibly the first movie to portray space travel. He pioneered many of the special effects techniques used in movies for most of the 20th century, demonstrating that film had unprecedented power to bend visible reality rather than just faithfully record it. He also led the way in making multi-scene narratives as long as 15 minutes, which became, in 1903, the industry standard. Edwin S. Porter, Edison's leading director in 1903, advanced the sophistication of film editing with works like The Life of American Fireman and the first Western movie, The Great Train Robbery. Porter arguably discovered that the basic unit of structure in a film is the shot rather than the scene as in a play. These developments helped establish the medium as more than a passing fad and encouraged the boom in Nickelodeons, the first permanent movie theatres. There were 10,000 by the year 1908 in the US alone. The previously an archaic industry became an increasingly big business, which encouraged consolidation. The French company Vitaphone achieved a dominant position worldwide through methods such as controlling key patents and the ownership of theatres. In the US, Edison led the creation of the Motion Picture Patents Company, which achieved a brief monopoly using not just aggressive business tactics, but sometimes violent intimidation against independent competitors.
Writing. Write a short paragraph outlining the history of film. Grammar Structure 1. Using relative pronouns as subjects and objects. Relative pronouns are that, who, whom, whose, which, where, when, and why. They are used to join clauses to make a complex sentence. Relative pronouns are used at the beginning of the subordinate clause that gives information about the main. There are two types of clauses, and a relative pronoun can act as a subject, an object, or a possessive in either. For example, this is the house that Jack built. I don't know the day when Jane married him. Defining the relative clauses provide essential information for understanding the sentence and cannot be omitted. Main clauses are opened by a relative pronoun and are not separated by a comma from the main clause. For example, this is the house that had great Christmas decorations. It took me a while to get used to people who eat popcorn during the movie. I don't like movies that have a lot of violence. Non-defining relative clauses containing pronouns contain information that is non-essential. If the pronoun were omitted, the sentence would still retain its basic meaning. For example, the library didn't have the book that I wanted. I think the person who I talked to on the telephone was the manager. The shirt that Carl bought has a stain on the pocket. Sentence. Function. Subject. People. Who or that. Reference to. Things or concepts. Which, that. Object. That, who, or whom. Which, that. Place, where. Time, when. Reason, why.
Writing exercise. Complete the sentences using one of the following clauses and an appropriate relative pronoun. Steal a plane. Perform thunderbolt. Is used to record scenes. Scare you. Invented the kinetograph. Makes classical films. The movie is about a man. Thomas Edison was the man. John works for a studio. What was the name of the actor? A camera is a device. A thriller is a film.
The rise of the feature film and film as art. The standard length of a film remained one reel, about 10 to 15 minutes in length, through the first decade of the century, based on producers' assumptions about the attention spans of their working-class audiences. But in Europe, multi-reel extravaganzas began to push the envelope of film length. With international box office successes like Queen Elizabeth in 1912, Quo Vadis in 1913, and Kyria in 1914, the multi-reel or feature film began to replace the short film as the cinema's central form. No one was more important in cementing this trend than American director D.W. Griffith, with his historical epics, The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance, in 1915 and 1916 respectively. Unprecedented in scale, they also did much to set the standards for editing and visual storytelling that remain the foundation of mainstream film grammar. The Birth of a Nation was also notable as perhaps the first movie to inspire widespread racial controversy. The trend towards literary adaptations resulted in movies becoming a respectable form of middle-class entertainment and gained them recognition as a genuine art form with a secure place in the emerging culture of the 20s. The sound era. Sound film technology, both for recording and playback, had been slow in development. In the second half of the decade, the invention of the Vitaphone System in 1927 was a breakthrough which allowed the jazz singer, featuring Al Jolson, to become a gargantuan hit and instantly popularize synchronized sound. Disney's Steamboat Willie in 1928 was the first film with entirely post-produced dialogue, sound effects and score. The first all-out Hollywood musical, The Broadway Melody, came to theatres in 1929. The Golden Age of Hollywood. The Golden Age of Hollywood roughly refers to the period beginning with the advent of synchronized sound until the end of World War II. This was the heyday of the Hollywood studio system, with tremendous outputs from Universal, MGM, Columbia, United Artists, Radio Keith Orpheum Pictures, Paramount Studios, 20th Century Fox, and Warner Brothers. Genre films became popular in the 1930s. Westerns, comedies, musicals, dramas, and animated cartoons. Dracula and Frankenstein incarnated into their silver screen depictions in 1931. King Kong premiered in 1933. Howard Hughes produced Hell's Angels in 1930. Walt Disney released several short animations at the beginning of the decade, including the first Technicolor production in 1932. The Golden Age of Hollywood produced some of the most celebrated American movies ever made, such as King Kong, Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, and Citizen Kane. Walt Disney also began producing his first feature-length films in this period, including Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1938, Bambi in 1942, and Pinocchio and Fantasia in the early 1940s. Fantasia is notable for Fantasound, a project that resulted in significant developments in film sound recording and playback techniques adopted and expanded upon by the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. The Golden Age of Hollywood effectively came to a close in 1948 when, in a landmark legal decision, the Supreme Court of the United States found several major studios guilty of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act through their monopolizing of the production, distribution, and exhibition of their movies. French film critics began to notice unique stylistic approaches to certain genres in American film, gangster movies and crime dramas in particular, and began to refer to this type of movie as film noir. Robert Siodmak's The Killers, based on a short story by Ernest Hemingway, is a prime example. Suspicion in 1941 and Saboteur in 1942 were Alfred Hitchcock's contributions to the film noir style. Orson Welles' 1941 film Citizen Kane was one of the most critically acclaimed movies of all time and helped to establish film noir. Other examples include Laura, Murder My Sweet, and Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, all released in 1944.
Reading. Reading comprehension. Answer the following questions. During what period did films begin to increase in length? What were two famous films in 1945 and 1946? Who made them? What was invented during the sound era? What was the first all-out Hollywood musical? Mention some of the most celebrated movies of the Golden Age of Hollywood. Why did the Golden Age come to a close?
Grammar structure 2. Conditional clauses using if. Conditional sentences are sentences that discuss real or unreal situations and their consequences. Full conditional sentences contain two clauses: the condition or situation and the consequence. Typically, the condition is the subordinate clause and the consequence is the main clause. Example given. Condition: if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius. Result: it boils. Condition: if it's raining here now. Result: then it was raining on the coast this morning. Condition: if she took that flight yesterday. Result: we'll see her tomorrow. Condition: if I had $1 million. Result: I would buy an airplane. Condition: if I had known about the party. Result: I would have gone. Writing exercise. Match the clauses in column A with the clauses in column B.
1. If I won the lottery. 2. You'll enjoy the Steven Spielberg film. 3. If I stopped in New York. 4. If you went to Hollywood. 5. If I travel first class. 6. If you don't get a ticket. A. You might see Tom Cruise. B. I would buy a new car. C. I can't go inside. D. I could probably see a Broadway show. E. If you have lived in USA. F. I could probably run into a famous actor.
The 80s. Sequels, blockbusters, and videotape. The shift that occurred in the 80s from seeing movies in the theatre to watching videos on a VCR is a move close to the original concept of Thomas Edison. In the early part of the 90s, the movie studios tried legal action to ban home ownership of VCRs as a violation of copyright, which proved unsuccessful. Ultimately, that decision worked in favour of the studios, however, as the sale and rental of home videos became a significant source of revenue for the movie companies. T8X Limited, a division of Lucasfilm Limited, was launched in 1982 and began preparing VCR conversions immediately. The digital age. After blockbuster motion pictures were defined in the 1970s, the way Hollywood released its films changed. Films, for the most part, would premiere in an even wider number of theatres, although to this day some movies still premiere using the route of the limited roadshow release system. Until this new digital age, the primary way for audiences to see their favourite films again and again was via the re-releasing of films. But home video would change all of this. Among the terms most associated with this new era, George Lucas and Star Wars, Industrial Light and Magic Studios, Steven Spielberg and Jaws.
The 1990s technical advances. Online distribution of film and video began in the year 1994 with the first public showing of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. In the 1990s, cinema began making another transition from physical film stock to digital cinema technology. Meanwhile, in the home video realm, the DVD would become the new standard for watching movies after their standard theatrical releases. The new millennium. Peter Greenaway's multimedia project, the Tulse Looper Suitcases, takes advantage of new media and high-definition technology. Interactivity and its relationship with cinema became clear in PlayStation's Grand Theft Auto, a video game that includes actors, a soundtrack, a narrative structure. The superhero film also began to emerge in importance and with more consistent artistic sophistication. The documentary film also rose as a potentially commercial genre. In the future issues around digital distribution, the need to achieve higher compression rates and cheaper technology will have to be addressed. Other important topics are content security, expiration of copyrights, the copyright infringement.
The underground. Alongside the Hollywood tradition, there exists the underground film world of low-budget, often self-produced works created outside of the studio system and without the involvement of labour unions. Student films such as Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter's Dark Star are also considered to be independent films. Experimental films that use cinema as a vehicle of fine art had been produced since the 1940s. For example, the work of Harry Everett Smith and Maya Deren. Social movements of the 1960s produced a larger and more receptive audience for this type of work, and more contributors to the field such as Kenneth Anger. Pornographic movies also avoided union involvement and appealed to an alternative underground audience. Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's Badass song is an example of an independently created underground movie that used post-classical plot devices. Van Peebles claimed this film was a pornography project during its production to avoid complications with the Screen Actors Guild.
Writing. Question. Questions for discussion. What invention moved closer to the original concepts of Thomas Edison? What major event is occurring in the digital ages? What was the most important technical advance in the 1990s? What are some future problems for the film industry? What is the underground? Name some underground studios.
Research Spot. Look for more information about Number 1. New technologies in the film industry. Number 2. History of the Academy Awards. Number 3. The first motion picture ever made. The Horse in Motion, 1878. Number 4. 3D technology in movies.